Ah, I have access.
Good evening. This is the Denver Area Access User Group. Tonight we're going to take a look at areas in access where you may not go normally. None of us try everything in all areas of access, and I'm going to pick some things tonight that I rarely go to that I'm going to show you where they are, how to use them, maybe what the implications are, and hopefully give you some ideas about how you might use them in your own work, whether it's your own personal databases, your employer's databases, or your clients' databases. But the first thing that's happening here is this, as you can see, this is the big deal since November 12th with Microsoft Access. And it is causing problems all around the world, and it is all sorts of different solutions are provided. Microsoft is saying that there are some fixes coming. You've got different fixes for different builds of different things coming on different dates, and there are some current workarounds, and I'm going to talk about that very briefly. Please chime in if you know anything about this that I'm not covering. But bottom line is, if you have a single table update query that has a where clause, and you have received an update that causes this, every query like that now gives you that the query is corrupt. If it's a stored query, it gives you the name of the query. If it's an update query that you generate in code and do an execute on it, you just get double quote, query is corrupt. And we just have to put up with it. One of the suggested fixes is you update the query so that the updates the results of another query rather than updating a table directly. And here they give you an example where you've got this update statement that's failing. And so they recommend that you create a query like this and change this statement to this statement. And that indeed does solve the problem. Thing is, how many databases do you have this kind of a query in, and are you going to be able to easily find them without running everything? That is their recommendation right now until these updates come out. The FMS and Loopchung, they have a very good description of this. It's been updated, I think, even as of today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this URL and put it in the chat window and make it to everyone. So if you want to take that URL and go read this yourself, you can. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but here it talks about updates that you can uninstall with the knowledge base numbers, and it gets into some detail about how to do that. So this is a very good reference for those of you who have to get this done. Some of it's very arcane, but at least there's something to do right now. Any other comments?
Well, I looked through all of that. I'm keeping up daily, looking at Luke's stuff and anybody that I can get a hold of, and I just resorted to the manual method you just described. You know, make a query on the table, then go change all your code statements that opens that query. and it does work, but it's tedious. I had to do about 36 queries. And Dave Finn, who's in here, reminded me, I was searching through global search and through all the code for do command run SQL, okay, or something like that. Then quote update. All right, well, I found a whole lot that way. Thought I had the thing solved. Dave reminded me that some people, including myself, would create a SQL statement and then run that. So the pattern was different. I did find 2 or 3 more, Dave. Thank you very much. So we're ready to deliver 2 clients tomorrow.
So this is my main screen for my homegrown invoicing application for my business, and I can import time cards. And one of the things I do is I import stuff into a holding table and then I validate it. And this came up when I was trying to do some invoicing here. And very quickly, I'm going to show you the solution to this. So, and it's a little different than what was shown on the screens there. And it's this query, and the design view is very simple. One table, we're doing an update, and we've got a where clause. So if I go into the SQL, and if you try to run it right now, of course, you saw that it fails. But if I go in here and all I do is I already had this aliased, which was nice. But now, instead of just using the table name, I put in a subquery that selects star from that table, and I save it, and I go back here and I do the validate. Everything worked. So that is the solution that I'm using in some of my stuff, where I embed a subquery in the main query rather than writing new queries and referencing those. One other solution is to rename your tables and then create a query by the same table name as the table used to be. And that way, any update queries that reference that table are now referencing a query of the same name. So you don't have to change any of your queries. You just change your table names, and then when the fix comes out, you can change your table names back. You do have to, of course, create a query that's just select star for each of your tables, but at least you don't have to go through and find all your update queries and fix them. Also, you don't have to fix your code that way. So, any other thoughts before I continue?
No, thanks. Some good tips there.
So this affects, if I remember right, it affects SQL Server if you run an update query on a linked table, but if you use a pass-through query, you're okay, right?
That's right, because it only affects when Access itself is processing the update. When you're doing a pass-through query, it's being processed on the server. And it fails whether you have a linked table to a server or a local table for Access or a linked Access table. It fails under the conditions that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, pass-throughs are good. So turn everything into a pass-through query, Kevin, you'll be fine.
But if I do that already, I don't have to do any work, do I?
All right, so I'm going to kill my webcam, and I am going to get started here on the main presentation, which is taking a look at things, interesting things in Access that you might not be using. So what I did was created a copy of the Northwind and database. You're all familiar with Northwind, I suspect. And I'm going to be showing you various things here in Northwind, including how to create a copy of Northwind for things like tonight. It's pretty cool. It's a lot easier than it used to be. So anyway, first thing I'm going to talk about is the navigation pane. I don't know about you folks, but since it came out, more and more, I use it just like Northwind does. I use it as a basic menuing system. We all have menus that pop up as forms on our older Access databases, but I've found that in most simple applications, I can use the navigation pane to set up my menus. Now, what we're all used to seeing here is something like this. And you do all your development here. I'll create groups if I've got a subset I'm working with. But if you want to create a menu system, you just right click on the navigation pane at the top there, and you come in here and you can create a group or a category, as they say. And then in there, within that, you can create other, what they call groups or subcategories, which we saw. And that's what they've done here. And when you come over here, then you just pick your category or your menu, and you now have all these things available to you. And if they stand alone, it works very nicely. And you can set up something like this in a matter of minutes, drag your forms into it and your queries, your tables, whatever, and have a very nice menu system for these, not your employees, your clients. And so supporting objects is something they did. They've just allow you to open tables here. You may not want to do that with your own clients and their applications, but there you go. So that's one thing that I don't see hardly anyone using. Any of you folks using the navigation pane much as your main menu for your databases?
I would be afraid of my users who have read 4 chapters in a 30-chapter Access book working on the navigation pane. It might just be me.
You can lock it down. I mean, you only add in here what you want, like you see here. When they created this, it's mostly forms that they've put in here. You don't have to, for example, they've allowed access to the tables, but you don't have to put them in there. And you can also specify things like if you want to show a query, you can set it as a snapshot so they can't edit it, things like that if you just want to throw things up. But I'm using it more and it works very well. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go into, on the far left here, the file menu.
Hey, Jim, can you hear us?
Yes.
Ken has a question.
Yes, Ken.
Hey, Jim, how do you
Can you speak up, please?
How do you determine who gets the navigation pane?
You don't. They either get it or they don't.
Okay.
What you do here is you set up your navigation. Well, okay, you can hide the navigation pane, but in terms of having it as a menu, you have to show it. Now, since you've asked the question, we're over here, we can go to options. And for the current database, we can hide the navigation pane.
Right.
And then when you start up the database, it will not show.
Right, I do that for all ours. None of our users can see the navigation options.
Right, and same thing here, whether you do it up here or you do it here, same navigation options for setting up the pane. But in this database, because the navigation pane is the main menu, of course, we're showing it.
Okay.
Now, if you want to reference the navigation pane in VBA code, it's a database property called the database window. It's not called navigation pane. So coming in here to file, first thing I wanted to show you was save as. you can save as various formats if you want to. I really don't want to be saving to an older database format like 2003, 2000, but something that I hadn't been using and I discovered is save as and just back up the database. I've just been going to Windows and making a copy as a backup, but you've got it built right in here. I don't know if you've ever seen that. So just back up the data, select that, select save as, comes up, defaults to the folder where your current database is, and it sticks a date on it, and you click save, and boom, your database is backed up, and it restarts this one, and now you can do your development, whatever you want, knowing you've got a good backup. And at any time, you come in here and you can create another backup if you want to, give it another name if you want multiple backups. But that's real quick, and I hadn't noticed that before when I was fumbling around looking at things here. You can, they're all the standard things, make an ACCDE, which is a compiled database that's executable only. But this is what I wanted to show you here. Now, if we go to info, I wanted to show you this, view and edit database properties. I don't know how many of you use this, but it's kind of interesting, but it gives you a list of documents. I don't know how useful it is. You can't do anything with this list, but this is useful. And over here, you can create custom database properties. For example, I want to create a client, it's text, and I'm going to call it that, and I can add it. And these are database properties that are predefined, owner, and it's kind of cool because you can put these in here and then they're available to you in VBA. You can get at these properties. So if you want to put any of these properties in here and get at them for purposes of display or processing, you can do it. If you're in VBA, you can also create your own properties other than these. They won't show up here, but you can create database properties and store stuff in them that are related to the entire database. Now, quite often you'll do that with maybe a system table, something like that. But if you particularly want to hide some information, you can create a custom database property in code and stuff into it, information into that, and then get at it through code to use later on. You might have a special password for a particular module, whatever you might do. But so you've got custom database properties you can get at. If we go down here, we got options, and I'm sure this is a familiar pop-up for all of you folks. Something that I don't know if you know what it is, but here you've got check for truncated number fields. Any of you know what that really means? It sounds kind of ominous. Well, what that means is I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to open up a table. Forgive me, I'm just going to go back to that's not a good one. Orders, details. All right, check for truncated number fields. I'm going to make this smaller and smaller, and you'll see that you got pound signs here. What the check for truncated number fields gives you is when it's checked, if it gets too small to display a number, you get the pound sign. And you're thinking, well, gee, I always get that. That's a good indicator. But when it's unchecked, I want to show you what happens. So I'm going to check for truncated number fields. I'm not going to do that. Some of these things you have to restart the database. This one you only need to reopen the table. So now I'm going to go It's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. You'll notice we don't get the pound signs if the number's too big to fit in the field. And the reason that the access people gave us that is if you have a field that's too small and you don't know it's too small, you might think this is $9.20. When in fact, well, it was $9.20. That's a bad example. You might think this is $2.75, but when in fact it's $12.75. But when the truncated number flag is checked, you will know that you aren't seeing the whole number. That can be important if you're trying to make decisions. I always kind of turn that off. I didn't realize what it was for. Then I did some research on it and realized, ooh, it's important to leave that on. So now, other access options, if you go to the data sheet, you can do some interesting stuff with the data sheet. And this is global to all tables and queries in datasheet view. So I'm going to say I want to see everything sunken in a 14-point medium text. And I'm going to click OK. If I close this and I open a table or a query, this is what you get. You can see it's kind of sunken. And something that I don't like about it, and that the reason I don't mess with that, is that it starts changing the format of the table. You notice all the gray stuff here.
Yeah.
And something I'm not getting because I turned it off accidentally. Let me put it back in here, just a moment. Options, customize the ribbon, and let's see, home, text formatting. All right, I'll tell you about that in a moment. I had that turned off. So here, when you start messing with the global options on your data sheets, you get some weird stuff, and it starts changing things you didn't intend to change. So if I go automatic for the fill, and I go automatic for the columns, the rows here, you can start to see we have the sunken format for all of these tables. But again, for some reason, when you use it, each table gets reset to some odd settings, and therefore I don't recommend it. So, and when you go back, if you reset those, reset it to flat, and we'll go back to 11 and normal, click OK. If I close those, we're back the way we wanted to be, but I don't like what that option does. But now, when you're in these tables, you also have the ability, as I just showed you, to change any of them. It's same as select queries. And let's say I want the alternating rows to be that color. So I can do it, and I save it, and it's only for that table. So that's inventory transaction types. I open it up, there it is. But if I go to invoices, it's still the default. So I can see where you may want to use some different colors for your alternating rows on different queries, particularly if you're showing queries or data sheets to your customers to give a visual clue as to what they're looking at, or cue, as you might say. Did I hear a comment? Okay. All right, so customizing the ribbon. I don't know how many of you customize your ribbons, but you can customize the standard ribbons. You can also customize a quick access toolbar, which is the next thing here. But what you're seeing is the full menus. If for some reason you don't want to show something, and I had text formatting turned off, I can come here and say remove, and I click OK. And now when a data sheet is open, table or query, the text formatting goes away. You can do that with any of these groups, and you can add it back in like I did earlier. But something that's very interesting, if you're doing work for your clients and you want to give them kind of subsets of all this, you can make your changes on your local machine and get the ribbons the way you want them to look, and then you can export all your customizations to a exported UI file. I'll do that here, and you just save it. And now I'm not going to do an import now, but you can then take that exported UI file and take it to a client's machine or another machine of yours and import those customizations and have everything be the same. Another thing you can do is if you've exported it and you go in and you mess with your customizations and don't like them, you can re-import the one that you saved. So that's something I didn't know you could do. Also, you can reset them to their default, and you'll notice the text formatting came back in when I did a reset.
So Jim,
Yes.
that the customizations that you were just showing us, that that changes it for all applications on that instance, right? It's not just for the application that you've developed.
That's right. This is a good point. This changes it for access, not for the database. So if you remove the text formatting and open a different database, text formatting will not be there. This is an application ribbon, not a database ribbon.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Now, something else that's relatively recent, I believe, I'm going to open several here, is you can now reorder your tabs in Access. That's cool. So I'm going to put this up front and put that out at the end. That, I don't know how recent that is. Kevin, do you know? Yeah, Kevin's.
I got to unmute. Sorry. So when you changing the tabs, yeah, that is something that I think came out maybe February or March this year.
Yeah,
It
it's
was
very recent.
right around the MVP Summit. It's only going to be in Office 365.
Yeah, I think Joe Jimenez showed it to us at
Yeah.
BAAUG.
Yeah, and I think, because there's a deployment process where it kind of goes out in rings. So I want to say like maybe insiders started getting it in January and it was kind of out in the wild by February or March.
When that came out, did anybody notice, did they kind of switch the appearance of the active tab? It seemed like around that time I started to have this bizarre confusion with which tab was active. Did they switch the highlighted? It seemed to me as though before the active tab was white and the rest were not.
Or in bold.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're doing some work to change the formatting of it because people were complaining, but don't quote me on that. It was something I thought I remember hearing them talk about.
Like around that time frame, I just started having this bizarre confusion about which tab was active and closing the wrong tab, and I just wondered if anyone else had that experience.
Yeah, I find it kind of annoying because I'm in and out of different versions of Access, and they move the close button. And so now I'm like, I'm always wrong. You know, it's like a USB. It's always the third time you try. So yeah, it's.
Well, and is the X up here, is that new too, to close it?
Yeah, it used to be on the far right-hand side, and you had one X for everything.
Yeah.
I remember. Jim, I never.
So now you can just kill that one without even having to right click.
Right.
All right. One last thing I want to show you. You're probably all aware of this, but it's really important, so I'm just going to throw it in. The whole trust center settings, macro settings. If you get your, you want to enable macros, yellow bar at the top. This is how it comes default. And you want to go to the bottom and enable all macros. That'll let your code run and so on. I think all of you know that this is where it is. And I set that up for my clients all the time when they get new machines or new installs. And fortunately, it's a one-time per machine and it's done. So let's go to the Home tab here. And what I'm going to do is open the order details. And I don't know if you folks use it, but this right here on queries and tables is really handy. It adds a totals row down at the bottom. Oh, there we are, truncated fields. And the idea here is, let's say we want to do a count. We have 55 orders, but you start doing things like, well, let's see the almonds, beer, and boysenberries. And you know you've got 7 orders from that. So this is very handy. And something else I want to show you that goes hand in hand with this and makes this even handier is I'm going to go into design view here. And I'm going to create a calculated field. I use these a lot and for all sorts of reasons, but I'm going to create an, let's see. Yeah, an extended price field. So I always put a lowercase c out front. So when I'm looking at column names, I know that it's a calculated column. And I'm going to say it's calculated. As soon as I tab out of that, it comes up and it's quantity times unit cost. Well, let's try it again. Quantity times unit cost. And the result type is currency. We're going to do currency with 2 decimal places. And I'm going to take the C off the front of it and we'll call it actually extended cost. Now I'm going to save it and we'll come back here to datasheet view. And now even more useful is if I do a sum, we know that we have $77,000 in orders for all items. And we can just pick a couple and it'll tell us 3 orders for a total of 1370. I mean, sure, you can write queries to do this, but this is really handy when you're jumping around in tables and select queries. If you just want to do some analysis and see some numbers. You can do, what's the average cost of an item across these. It doesn't mean much, but there you go. So that, very, very useful. How many of you are using calculated columns on a regular basis?
Me,
Who's me? I didn't see the name.
George.
Okay. Another, and this is really a good place to use a calculated column. In most of my databases where I have names, I'll have a full name calculated column. And it'll just, in this case, I'll say last name. I'll put a space in there, and first name. Actually, since it's last name first, I'll put a comma. And click OK, and I'm then going to move it up right after the names here. Result type is short text. I'm going to save it. So now we have a full name, and you can, as you can see, you can treat it just like a regular column. You can filter on it. You can sort. And with names, it's so handy because you don't have to be concatenating names together for use in other places, anywhere in the database. It's all right here in the table. It's done for you, and you just reference the column. Typically, I'll have a name that's in reverse and a name that's forward, and I'll use it for different purposes. And you can get some very complicated expressions in there, but I am just a fan of calculated columns because they save you work down the line and provide a lot of consistency when you do need something like a full name. All right, so I want to save the design. Yeah, I'll save that. So now I'm going to open employees and show you something else a lot of you may avoid. And actually, it can be very useful. It just depends on the size of your database and what your needs are. But you'll notice the little column here. That's for plus sign, excuse me. That's for sub data sheets. If you click that, you'll see a sub data sheet that's related to employees. Well, not exactly. In this database, employees are related to a lot of different tables. In the design of employees here, you'll notice that the sub data sheet, let me show properties here, is set to auto. Well, auto is fine if there's like one child for this table, but when there isn't, you've got to pick one the first time you want to do a sub data sheet. So I'm going to pick this, and I'm going to pick, let's see, orders, because each employee is tied to one or more to 0 or more orders. And what happens is now I've got a sub data sheet. So for Nancy Freehofer, a lot of orders with her name on it. But you can also go into the order itself. You can have sub data sheets. And in this case, this particular order has one item on it. Now, it can get looking very busy here, but it's very useful. And something you can do to kind of clean things up is hide fields. Since I have the order ID here, I don't need it. Excuse me, I don't need the primary key or the ID field just to see the sub data sheet. So I am going to hide that field. So now I can see that this order has a product, quantity, what have you. And I can hide any of these I want. And then when I come back in the future, I've got kind of an interesting way to cascade through things. If you decide you don't want to hide the fields, whoops, you can unhide the fields, and you can see I've got 3 of them hidden right now. You can bring them all back by right-clicking in the columns here and hiding or unhiding them. Most people are told, don't use the cascading data sheets because they slow down your database. Yes, they can slow down your database sometimes dramatically, but if you don't have a large database, they can be very useful. And something that a lot of people don't know is that you can also, with your sub data sheets, you can specify a query as a sub data sheet. So I went in and changed it just now, and I'm going to save it and do a data sheet view. And right now, I've changed it. So now the sub data sheet is a query. So that's pretty cool. And queries themselves can have sub data sheets because they're essentially tables in Access. So there you go. I don't know how many of you use sub data sheets, but I've found them quite useful at times. I use them sparingly. If you just enable everything, all sub data sheets throughout the database, yeah, it can slow you down. Anyone using sub data sheets to any extent or to any good purpose?
No.
Rarely. But like you say, sometimes they make sense.
All right, let's, so I showed you here in the home menu, I showed you totals when we've got the tables open, we've got some other things going on here. The text formatting I showed you. These are just some of the interesting things that are going on in the home menu. Let's go over to Create and take a look at a few things here. I already showed you calculated columns, which kind of falls under Create, but I needed it for home. So calculated columns are cool. And but what I wanted to show you here is something I had never looked at until today. Application parts. Insert or create portions of a database or an entire database application. Create tables, forms, and reports as database parts. Save combinations and use them to form common components. You can also save an entire application. Well, I went in and started looking at this. I click on it, and to be honest with you, I couldn't figure out how this can be useful. I picked something I thought wouldn't do any damage to this north wind. So let's, we got a message box. So I did an application parts on a message box and then nothing came up. Okay, earlier something came up. A form came up on the screen that was a template for a message box. Oh, here we are. It just created it, didn't bring it up. So it added a message box to my application. And if I open it, well, there you go. This needs a lot of work because a message box, first of all, shouldn't be a tabbed form in 99.9% of cases. If it's a massive message box with lots of information, maybe, but I've never had one like that. So I'm not sure what this is for. Does anyone use application parts?
No. Not here.
So I'm going to go over here to options. I'm going to customize the ribbon. I'm going to come in here to the create, and I'm going to remove templates. There. Now when I come in to create, that darned application parts is gone.
Okay, yay.
Anything else you want gone can be gone too. Unfortunately, you cannot make individual items in these groups on the ribbon disappear through customizing the ribbon. You can only customize the groups, which are these parts here. You can add and reveal those. You try to remove, for example, the report wizard from the reports, it won't let you do it.
previously. You're allowed to create your own groups though, and then you can put into that group the 1 or 2 items that you want, and then hide the original group.
Yes, you can create your own groups, hide the originals. I've done that with print preview on some reports. I want the print preview to come up, but I wanted to hide some options in one group, so I hid the main group and recreated it without a couple of the options. So it looks almost identical to print preview, but I managed to remove a couple items. But you're right, I had to hide the main one and create a duplicate of it without the items I wanted to delete. All right. Let's see. I'm going to go over here to forms. Whoops. All right, we're in create. I'm going to go to forms, and you can do all sorts of things to help you create a form. And what I wanted to show here is under more forms, you have some interesting stuff, but they're not, 3 of them are not available. And at first I thought, well, that's odd. I want to create a data sheet. Why can't I? Well, the reason I can't is you got to pick a table first. So now those 3 options are available, and you can create a data sheet form from the customers table right now. And I'm going to do that and then talk about why you might do this. Quite often, your clients like working in a view that looks like Excel. But just opening a query or a table in datasheet view doesn't cut it, because if you're in a table, you've got too much control, the user does, and even if you hide columns, they can figure out how to unhide them. But if you create a datasheet form, it may look like a data sheet, but if you go into design view, this did it in layout view, but what you have is a bunch of individual controls. So if, for example, I want a data sheet, but I don't want the fax number in it, and I go back to datasheet view, the fax number is gone. And there's, unlike a table, it's not hidden, it's gone because you didn't include it in the form. Now with a query, certainly you can just not include the column. But with a select query, there's something you can do with the form that you can't do with the select query. So if we go into the design view on the form and we bring up the properties, I'm going to go down here and I am going to allow edits, but I'm not going to allow deletions or additions. You have some control over that in a query in that you can open a snapshot, but a snapshot won't let you do anything but look at it. Here, I have a data sheet form. I'm not going to allow any additions or deletions, but I'm going to let them edit the data. So I go back to data sheet view, and you see now I can't create anything. If I try to delete this, I can't delete it, but I can edit. So that's one of the advantages. If your client wants to work in an Excel data sheet kind of thing, use a data sheet form and give them exactly what they need. You've got the control here, even though it looks like a data sheet. One other thing that you have control over is this is a form, it's not a data sheet. So you have access to code. You can put code behind these controls. You can put code behind the form. You can do conditional formatting, just like you would with a normal form that you can't do in tables and queries. So yeah, there we go. I'm a big fan of data sheet forms. Typically, they're embedded inside of another form, but I like data sheets, and I never give my clients select queries or tables. I always do a data sheet form, and that way, as the developer, I take control of exactly what I want them to be able to do in this user interface.
So Jim, can the client reorder the columns and hide and change sizes? Okay.
Yep. There, and if you save this, I believe it stays that way. Nope, it didn't. It may be that because I've turned off some of the capabilities there, but I have written code in the past that I allow the clients to move things around, but when they close it and reopen it, I have a saved order and I reset the order so that it always opens up the same way. So any edits they make, like in order or what have you here, are gone after their session. And
I actually prefer that, because when you push out a new version, and they're used to having it come back to the default.
right. And the reason I've done that in the past is I had a client request that we have several people using this machine, and if someone changes the order of columns or whatever in this form, another person comes in and gets confused. So that's when I went ahead and saved the order, and then I restore it when they come back in for the next session, whether it's that person or someone else.
Another very powerful thing in this view is conditional formatting. You can color code, dollar amounts above a certain level, or reorder points and things that people really love.
Yes, and forms. Yep, as you saw here, you can start getting into doing your conditional formatting. And like I commented, you can't do that with queries and tables. You can to some extent on numeric fields. You can, depending on whether it's positive, negative, or 0, you can make the text color change, but that's about the extent of it for conditional formatting in a table or a select query. All right, so external data, let's go here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the employees. Let's go to tables, employees. Here we have 9 employees, and we want to export this. So we have lots of export options. You can select them all, do an Excel export. We're all pretty familiar with that, but something that not everyone is familiar with, and I know this because I ran into this with another developer. I'm going to select the first 7 rows and do an Excel export, and you'll notice if you export it with formatting, and this is what I wanted to show you, I can export only the selected records. And let's do it again. Export, open the destination file. Yeah, so we can see it. So we've got the first 7 of the 9 selected, and the Excel file comes up, and sure enough, we have 7, the 7 that I selected. So that's what I wanted to show you there, is you don't have to export a full table if you want to send something to Excel. Unfortunately, I'm going to close this. Unfortunately, unless there's a way I don't know, you can't do selects. I'm holding down the control key and trying to select disjointed rows. You can't. You can only select rows as a group like this. Does anyone know a way, for example, for me to exclude this one right here?
What happens if you filter it out?
Oh, you can do that, yeah. So
Yeah.
let's not do 3, and there you go. And if I do the export, I'm sure that, and I'm not going to do export only selected records. I should get 8 records. And sure enough, I get 8 records. So there you go. If you filter it out and export them all, you can get exactly what you need. I was just disappointed that I couldn't go in here like you can in Excel and select the rows you want, even if there are gaps between them. All right. Let's go to the database tools. There's some interesting stuff here. I'm going to close this. And we're going to look at object dependencies. I've not done much with this, so it kind of caught my attention when I was looking for things that people may not use very much. Let's have a show of hands. Who use object dependencies?
I do.
I don't see any.
I do, but
use this.
with some caveats.
All right, and maybe we'll come up with the caveat when I show you this. So I'm going to click Object Dependencies under Database Tools. And it needs to be updated. It could take several minutes. Do I want to continue? Yes, because it's a small database. They're not kidding. If you have a large database, it could take several minutes. So we're on our way. And there, we now have the database has been examined for object dependencies. And you can now start doing some interesting looking around in your database. For example, you'll notice over here I have selected employees, and up here I have the employees table. And I'm going to look at objects that depend on the employees table. So employee privileges, orders, and purchase orders depend upon the employees table. So I'm going to open employee privileges, and you'll see that the employee ID is there. That's why it depends on the employees table. Same kind of thing. All of these tables have some sort of dependence on the employee. And here we have the, again, the employee ID. So it kind of gives you an idea if you're plowing through your database and you're thinking, do I need that table? Do I not? What uses it? Well, this is kind of cool because if you run the object dependencies, you get not 100% perfect idea, but you get a pretty good idea of what's being used and what isn't. Now, if you drill down here, the employee privileges, those are the objects that depend on employee privileges. Come over here, invoices. If I click invoices and refresh, now I'm looking at invoices over here. And orders depend on it. There's a query that depends on invoices for its, there you are, for its result set. And let's go to a query. Let's pick inventory sold. So objects that depend on me. I don't know why it lists orders as depending on this query because orders does not depend on a query. That is something I've been unable to figure out. Dawn, do you have any comment?
Go ahead.
Objects that depend on the inventory. So I couldn't tell you why that would be.
Can you speak up, please? You're muffled.
Is that better?
Yes.
I couldn't tell you in this case. It's kind of a mystery in this case.
Okay. So that's where object dependencies may fall apart a little bit, is that sometimes it gives you results you don't expect, but it still is kind of an interesting way to plow through your application and kind of get a feel for how things are connected. And not connected just as in the relationship window, which I'll show you very briefly in a moment, but connected through usage.
Jim?
Jim, I inherit a lot of orphaned applications that have a lot of clutter. You've probably seen the same thing. And this, to use your words, plow through, that's the operative word here. You'd have to do one at a time, both ways, you know. The radio buttons at the top, the two there.
Right.
However, to put a plug in for Loopchung, he has one of his packages that will plow through automatically everything and give you a report of what's not used. It's just really handy.
And you are stealing my thunder. I was about to say, I've got a better way of doing it.
Go ahead.
And
I
I'm
already
not going to
paid
run the
Luke, so go ahead.
documentation because it could take a couple minutes, even for a database this small. But Total Access Analyzer will do what Object Dependencies does on multiple bottles of steroids. And once you've generated documentation for a database, it's completely searchable. And there are over 300 different reports you can generate about your database, in addition to things like suggestions for unused objects, unused code, unused variables, things to really help you clean up your database, as well as finding errors. You know, for example, a query that references a table that no longer exists. It'll find stuff like that. So you got to have Total Access Analyzer, and I suspect a fair number of you folks do. I've used this
That's
since,
$300 I ever spent.
yeah. I've used this ever since it first debuted with, I think it was Access 2. Is that about right, Kevin?
I think one of the first assignments I had was at a company. I think they had a copy of one that ran on maybe 1.1.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. You have to ask Luke for the definitive, but I think it was that was the product that he actually switched, because he was doing Borland stuff, and this is the way he tells the story. He went to a demo about Access in Borland. He basically said, "I'm all in on Access." So I think it came out in 1.1, but not sure.
I used
So I did
1.1
33
Access
years.
for about 2 weeks, and then Access 2 became available, and that's when I moved to Access 2 and started using Total Access Analyzer as soon as I knew that it existed. Now, I just noticed something here. I wonder if this is failing because of our error. There you are. Query is corrupt. So even Luke's stuff is failing
Look at
right
that.
now because of
3340, there it is.
All the hot ones.
So I have to expect that Luke and his people are very upset at the moment.
Jim, George
Jim,
Young here.
on
George Young here. I just wanted to add quickly, although this is not a paid product placement, that FMS sponsors our meetup site that probably many of you use. So we encourage you to purchase and use their great products.
I use Analyzer, Detective, and Code Tools when I'm in the code view. I don't use any of their other stuff at the moment, but Analyzer is the one I use the most if you don't count Code Tools. If I open code, and you're right, that's not really where I wanted to go right now, but if I open code, I got the FMS Code Tools here, and all sorts of good stuff that MZ Tools gives you, but some other good things too. Code cleanup, delivery, all sorts of good things you can do with Code Tools. So I do that also.
So Jim, with object dependencies, I've used it a fair amount, but always with the caveat that it's not going to tell you anything about what's going on in code. And do you know offhand if your TAA would offer anything there?
It offers a lot. I commented before, but some of the things that I can recall off the top of my head, it will tell you what code modules are not used. It will tell you what procedures don't have error handling. It'll tell you declared but unused variables. It'll tell you procedures that are not used. It'll tell you when a procedure could be private when you've made it public, and vice versa. Well, you can't do vice versa because it'll fail. But if you make a public procedure, it can detect that, yeah, make it private. It's not being used outside this module. So an awful lot it can tell you about your code. Can anyone think of anything else that tells you about the code that I didn't include? I'm sure there's a lot more.
One thing that I find this useful, you know, when I'm trying to do a cleanup of a database. But one thing that you need to keep in mind is that when you run the object dependencies, it turns on your track name autocorrect. And most times you're advised to keep the track name autocorrect off because it can be a performance killer. Scroll down, there you go. So that first checkbox you want to uncheck. The second one seems to be fine. It's the tracking that's the big deal. So after you finish cleaning up your database, you would be advised to come here and uncheck that first checkbox.
So I'm going to close this and I'm going to test you, Don.
Okay.
Object dependencies. There we go. Enable name autocorrect and continue. All right. So you're right. We don't need to go back. It just told us it's going to do it.
Gotcha.
All right, so we're back. Sorry about that. I enabled it, so we had to wait for it to finish. So I'm going to close that. You're all familiar with the relationships window. It is so useful. If you're not using it, you should. And the main, one of the main reasons I use it, and I think, John, it was you who commented earlier, you've inherited a lot of databases.
Yep.
When I inherit a database, the first thing I do is I come into the relationship window, I clear the layout, and then I show all relationships. And generally, most of the time, I get a bunch of tables with no lines between them. Because people
I've seen that, and I think you'll get the lines if you click show all, I think, and in a case like that. I've seen that happen.
No. I'm saying that I'll go into this inherited database and they've created all these tables and they've created no relationships between them.
Mm-hmm.
I've also done that when I've interviewed potential subcontractors. I'll ask them to provide me with a good piece of their work. And the first thing I do is I come to this window and I take a look and see if they've got one-to-manys. Because sometimes you'll see the relationships, but they haven't enforced relational integrity, referential integrity. They haven't enforced that. And that kind of gives me a real quick overview of just what the skill level is of the person I'm considering using as a subcontractor. And you'd be surprised, or maybe not, how many of them really don't have a clue when it comes to database design, how to tie things together with referential integrity. So very useful window. Also, it's useful if I just want to, find out what's related to customers. Okay. Quite often I'll do something like that. If I can't remember, or in the case of orders, I show direct and I say, now that's an important table. It's related to everything. And since this is an orders database, Northwind orders, I guess it should be related to everything. All right, let's go back to the database tools and do the database documenter. So I'm going to document, let's document queries. I could do all object types, but I'll do it. What the heck? I'm going to select all, and I'm going to click OK, and we're going to document this database. We're going to document the heck out of it. Won't take too long.
Did somebody fall asleep back there? Dude, that guy's not getting my text, is he? Yeah. Oh no. John Raleigh, I've sent him 2 texts saying, please mute your mic. Right there.
This ran a lot faster this afternoon.
No, I'm not a presenter.
Okay, we're almost done. It's into the modules right now. Oh, reports, excuse me.
Yeah.
All right, so I have no idea why this just came up, because I didn't ask for a relationship, but it shows relationships first. So what comes up is all the documentation in the form of a report. It's an access report. And for this relatively small database, this documenter has generated a report that has, hold on, you can see it's formatting, massive number of pages. Now you could document individual pieces like just the tables and get a shorter report, but I'll let this thing go to the end and then I'll comment on what I think of this report.
I do tables a lot, but I use the options to cut down just with tables all the information it wants to put there. All I want is the field names, really, and the sizes and that sort of thing. So I've never actually done this global thing.
And
don't have the patience.
Now,
What I've done is you can output it.
Analyzer up on the screen a moment ago, and this is a poor stepchild of that.
Exactly. What I've done is I've output it to a PDF and then done a Control F in the PDF just to be for sure that I've caught all instances of something.
I tried Control Break, it didn't work.
Started it over.
There it goes.
Laura Wright says you could do a control break.
Yeah, I know. I just did it, and Control Break isn't working. Let's see.
That's McClure and Keller.
Well, here's another thing you can do.
Wait.
Oh, there we are. So this small database generated 1,600 pages of documentation. I'm gonna close this. We'll go back to the documenter and we'll do just the tables. I want to show you something. We'll do 4 tables. There. So now we have 4 pages of documentation, and it's just showing the relationships. Did I do something wrong?
Check options. There, let's check there. So those are the ones it's going to show. There you go.
I'm showing my ignorance of this this add-in or this piece of Access because I use Total Access Analyzer for this. We'll include names and fields of indexes and click OK. All right, so now you can see what this gives you. If you're looking for this kind of information, that's fine, but do any of you find a paper output like this at all useful?
Without all that detail, yes, indeed. One of those pages will show what I need all the time, especially when I'm comparing two tables against each other. And we just play with the options and you'll see what I mean. Uncheck properties and leave that checked and uncheck that. That's my setting, and it will remember that too. There you go. That's what I look at. That's the guts of what I need to know. The rest of it's fluff.
Something I did find that could be useful, and I'm going to come out, I'm going to go in once more, and I'm going to go to the modules, and I'm going to select all the modules, do options. I'm just going to document the code. And so here we have these modules, about 7, 8 modules, and all I've done is document the code. Now, that if you want a paper copy of your code for backup, something like that, you want documentation, you want to hand it to your client, this is good for that. But I found another use for this. I documented all of the modules. So what I'm going to do is come up here and I'm going to export this report to a text file. Sure. And I'm going to open it after I export it. And what I've done here is I've just created a searchable, editable text file of all my code in the database in one operation. When you're in the code editor, you can export individual modules one at a time, but you can't do everything at once. And this actually becomes, I think, a very useful backup for some of your code. If you want to put it aside and have a copy of your code at a particular time, more than just having backup copies of your database. I think this could be useful.
I like that one.
Now, it's not particularly well formatted, but you've got it, and like I said, you can get at it now. You can do things with it, copy stuff, whatever you need to do.
Put a little PC copy and paste it back in.
Yeah.
All right, now we're going to analyze performance. And I'm going to select all the tables. This, what I'm going to do is move off to a different database. I'm going to analyze performance here because it gives me more interesting results because I haven't been very good with this, keeping this one clean. So I'm going to analyze the performance of my time tracker database, and I'm going to select all the queries. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to go OK. So now what happens is you get this awful form. Nothing scrolls, you can't resize it, but it's got some analysis in it, and they're coded in 4 different ways. So you have recommendations with an exclamation point, and it's recommending I add an index to active and client code. It has a suggestion that I relate expense to project, which is probably a good recommendation. And it also has what they call ideas. And it wants me to change the data type of hours from short text to something else. Well, I know that this is my holding table when I import time cards, and my holding table is all text fields until I've validated everything. So that's pointless. But what you can do is with a recommendation, you can select optimize. If I click optimize right now, it's going to add an index to group and holding ID in the holding table. So I'm going to optimize, and you'll see it went from recommendation to fixed. And if we go over to that table right now, time card holding, we'll see that that index is there. So this can give you some ideas about what Access thinks might be good for you to do to optimize performance. In some cases like this one, I know I don't need to do that. So still takes a human eye, but it is interesting what it comes up with. I just wish you could change the size of the window and it scrolled, because some of these descriptions, for example, it doesn't tell you the whole thing. It doesn't even list it down here, what the whole message is. And so I know what it's trying to tell me because I happen to know that table, but it's very poorly done as far as the user interface goes. Looks like we're getting close to the end here. One other thing I wanted to show you that I've never used very much, but actually works pretty well, is this. Move data. Split your database into 2 files, one containing the tables and one containing the queries and forms. Now, none of you have ever done that, right? You always have all your tables and forms in one database. Is that right?
No. One of the 10 Commandments. One of the 10 Commandments.
The way I've done this in the past is I create a copy of my database, I remove all the tables from one, and I remove everything but the tables from the other, and then I link the front end to the back end, as we say. Well, this does it for you. So I'm going to split the database, but this is important if you're just screwing around. Make a backup copy of your database before splitting it. And that's where what I showed you at the beginning is a good idea.
Yeah.
All right, and now I'll come back here and I'll split the database. And it's going to pick your current directory, and you got split. And in a database this size, it says it's successfully split. And there you go. The tables are all gone. They're now linked to the Northwind DAAUG_BE for backend. And it works. It's that simple. I didn't know it was that clean, and I'll be using that from now on, because quite often when I start a database, I will have it in one piece, and as I get ready for deployment, I'll break it into multiple pieces and start adding things like custom linking code if I want to, and so on. So there you go. And if I were going to show you more, which I'm not because we're running out of time, I would bring back the original. That's why I made the backup, because I was fooling around. So I'm going to end it there. Any questions, comments, observations? Is there anything I didn't show that you would like to see? I just picked these things as interesting things that you may not have looked at.
Jim, what do you think about the table analyzer?
One more, yeah.
Well, here's what I think of the table analyzer. I'm going to analyze employee privileges. Let the wizard decide. Let's pick a bigger one, order details. It doesn't want to analyze 2 records. That's what I think of the table analyzer.
Where is corrupt?
Why did that show up?
Why did that show up? Because the table analyzer is written in Access. It's
I know, but
an automatic
specific.
add-in, and they've got an update query that isn't working, so they shot themselves in their foot.
Wow.
340.
But other than that, it's a great tool.
Other than that, yes, if you have a flat table, it can actually do a rather good job of identifying how you might split it into parent and child tables.
So Access itself is broken because of this
Yes.
Office update. Yeah, it's good for them to know that.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking about the table analyzer. I almost forgot to mention that because I wanted to show you that.
Yeah, totally unscripted too. Well done.
Oh,
Thank you very much, Jim. That was great.
Thank you, Jim.
Yay, good job.
Class act.